What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So controversy has once again broken out around the Switch 2. This time, though, having to do with a hardware component of the system. And I wanted to bring it up because I want to see how many of you who own the system have actually noticed this. We'll go over that here today. Also, we are going to be talking about what looks like might be shaping up to be another Game of the Year contender from Kojima Productions. It's out today. Well, the reviews are live for Death Stranding 2, and it's looking like it might be falling into that category. And we also have, once again, generative AI being brought up for games, and you might be surprised exactly as to who was discussing it. All of that and more. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button. Helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And of course, members for the channel do get Newswave early. If you would like to learn more about that, click the join button or link in the description down below. And we're going to start today with MindsEye and the studio behind it, Build a Rocket Boy. It's no secret that the game came out and wasn't exactly in the best shape. That's putting it lightly. I did an entire video on it, basically not recommending it in its current form when it launched, and I can't really recommend it still after several patches have gone out. And now it appears that Build a Rocket Boy is indeed facing layoffs, which you can see. This is posted over on IGN saying MindsEye developer Build a Rocket Boy begins layoff process and amid disastrous launch. Studio sources say this was in a response to IGN saying, "We can confirm that we have had to make the painful decision to notify our hardworking team of some internal changes at Build a Rocket Boy. While we are working to reassign roles for as many of those impacted by these changes as possible, sadly we are initiating a formal consultation process that may result in redundancies. This decision has not been made lightly, and we are committed to handling this process with transparency, fairness, and respect for all employees. We'll provide further details to the team over the coming weeks." So I don't think it's very surprising to hear this after, again, the state that MindsEye launched in. And as they're going through these different patches, the question in general of what was going to be a universe that was based in originally this creation game tool of everything, again, it's been all over the place. So unfortunate, sure, that the people are being laid off at Build a Rocket Boy, but also not very surprising with what we get after what we got with MindsEye. Also, we have a couple of showcases here coming up in 2025 that have been announced. One is actually happening this week. We can see over on Gematsu saying Arc System Works will host Arc System Works Showcase on June 26th. 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern, featuring the latest information on Arc System Works, including the announcement of new titles the company announced. So they'll have this up on YouTube in English or Japanese. And I mean, we know, of course, that they're working on Marvel Token. That's a big one that people are focusing on. However, I kind of feel like that's something that Sony will be calling the shots on in terms of marketing, and they'll want to align it very, very closely next to the PlayStation brand. Still, I guess they could do something here with that. But there have also been some discussions around another game they're going to have out later on this year that seemed to be a Switch 2 exclusive, based on some of the leaks coming out of Arc System Works, and people were tying it over to Hotel Dusk, so definitely want to keep an eye on, if nothing else, maybe for some legitimate surprises coming out of Arc System Works. Oh, and the other showcase is coming out of THQ Nordic, as this page was updated over on their website, and it is the Digital Showcase 2025, August 1st, so they're announcing it well in advance here. 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern time. They have everything here to set a reminder for it again because it's so far off in the distance. They also have a little showcase teaser trailer here that seems to point to things like Gothic Remake, Titan Quest 2, Wreckfest 2. My thing with, at this time, THQ Nordic, it is kind of like a grab bag of who knows what they'll show up with. But I'd like to hear something about the Darksiders project. I know it was announced in early development, so it might not be ready to show. But that's kind of what I just look towards THQ Nordic now mostly is, okay, what's next for Darksiders? But again, could be some legitimate surprises here. However, we're still a ways off, about a month and a half now. So we'll see what they have for us to kick off August. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with controversy that's broken out around the Switch 2, and that's just kind of how it goes with this system. Really, since it was fully revealed, and then we got the pricing, the game key card stuff, it's been never ending, it feels like, when it comes to just discussion and back and forth around this system. However, one thing about the device that's been brought up seemed to be almost an epiphany for some people who have been using it since launch, and now they're not really sure how to even look at the system. So this started, we can see, from Digital Foundry. Now, they put up what was really like a 2-hour review podcast about the Switch 2 and some of their thoughts around the software, its performance in games, the hardware, and the screen, which is, you can see that aptly named Switch 2 DF hardware review, a satisfying upgrade, but display issues are problematic. So the issue we're running into here with the screen, as noted here by Digital Foundry, the response time of it is not great. Like, the average response time is unfortunately causing things like ghosting when moving in fast-paced games. Specifically, though, seems to be more around 2D titles, all right? So this is something that I noticed on the menu, but not really in 3D game. Like, I don't really notice it in Mario Kart World, which is mostly what I've been playing on the system, and I haven't really noticed this in Pokemon Violet. But when I turned on Super Mario World, I was able to notice it when I ran fast and looked at some of the background objects. You can see what is kind of like a ghosting effect of almost a smear for some of those different background elements. Now, to compound on top of this, there was what looked to be kind of a review around the screen itself that was posted up online here. And this was translated over into English using Google Translate, so we're kind of doing our best here. But it's funny, at the top of this review of the 7.9-inch display on the Switch 2, says this is a report on the performance of the device's display, which 99% of people who buy a Switch 2 don't even notice. Yeah, that is correct. In fact, I haven't really seen many people mention or discuss this whole thing with the screen with response time until just recently, really, until a lot of the stuff broke out online and people started to look at the display maybe with more of a magnifying glass. So if you scroll down to average response time as was recorded on this website, you can see it's pretty far down there. In fact, they say it sets a new world record, but not the good kind, with an average of 17.06 milliseconds, all right? That was recorded over 30 patterns, and that means there were some lower response times that they recorded, down to about 8 seconds or so, but then they also recorded some all the way up to 27. Anyway, putting it in context here across a whole line of other panels, yeah, it's not great. I mean, they had the next one that it trails with its 17 milliseconds. I mean, you have the M2U27 at 11 milliseconds. So, yeah, the response timing there is pretty much why you're seeing, in this case, like the pixels refresh and be a bit slower. So you do see what are almost ghost images of the different items on screen. There is something funny about this review, though, that is kind of being left out as people are pointing to certain things like that specific chart. They were pretty positive overall outside of the response time with this screen. In fact, if you look at the reviews for it, even FPS and esports, so competitive gaming, they give it a B. And they even point to the 120 hertz display as being a bright spot in that instance. However, there is something they bring up that I think is a good idea. It's the idea of being able to turn on 120 hertz display support in handheld mode specifically, of course, because everyone has that same kind of screen there with that ability, in menus or by default, so that if a game doesn't support it, it'll kick back down to 60, but you'll always go into a game ready to accept the 120 hertz display output. I like that idea, at least for the menus and scrolling around. It should make it look a lot smoother and be more responsive there. I mean, they even give solo play with RPGs an A, even general office work, a B, and professional photo and video editing. They gave it a B+. HDR content reproduction they haven't done, and to be honest, the screen on the Switch 2 can't reach a peak brightness that's high enough to really show HDR well. So that's kind of an issue with it, and I sort of look at HDR in handheld mode as more of a marketing thing than anything else. But I am really curious to see if any of you out there have noticed this, because I think more people than not are just not going to be very sensitive to it, and they're just now learning that it's a thing on the screen. Like during the podcast over the weekend, RGT mentioned he really hasn't noticed it at all. It was brought up to him and he pulled up Sonic Mania and was playing. He's like, I don't know, maybe, I don't really see it. And that's the thing. For Digital Foundry, for them, of course, they are really zoomed in and focused on every little pixel and movement and frame rate, so they're very sensitive to it. Whereas I do believe that most people, the average person who's buying the Switch 2, probably really isn't going to notice it much, but I don't think I think it's still worth bringing up for Nintendo to look at and say, hey, maybe we can do something through a firmware patch. Some have mentioned the idea of overdrive. Don't really know what effect that would have on battery life, as they're kind of already, they're skating the line here when it comes to 2-hour battery life. It's like, do we want to go much further below that even? So I think Nintendo is playing this efficiency game, walking this tightrope, and it's potentially a thing that's playing into that right now with the response time of this LCD, kind of to see how much they can get away with, and if they do indeed need to send more voltage here or anything like that to fix some of the responsiveness of that screen, or maybe it's just a cheaper display that they managed to pick up and they're dropping into the Switch 2s. We'll see. But let me know down below if you're someone that has noticed this even before this was brought up, or if now you're looking for it and you're noticing it everywhere. Next up, let's talk about Death Stranding 2, as reviews are now live. In fact, the game will be set up in early access, as you can pay an additional $10 for a $80 game there and get in Wednesday at midnight local time. At least that's what I've seen from those maps that they've put out there, where it tells you, depending on where you're on the world, when it launches. To my understanding, it's Wednesday night, 12 a.m. midnight Eastern time. Still, reviews are live, and we can see over Metacritic currently sitting at the time of this recording at a 90. I have seen it jump between 89 and 91, so it's like right in there. Could still creep up to a 91 and be dead on with my prediction, but I'm still pretty happy here with where it's sitting. We can see some of the reviews, though. This, for example, is from Push Square, giving it a 100, saying it will prove to be one of the defining games of the PS5 generation. Death Stranding 2 on the Beach is a profound achievement of design, gameplay, narrative, and visuals. As all four meet in the middle, Kojima Productions has crafted a cinematic spectacle that flawlessly transitions between action and traversal, all wrapped up in the most absorbing of narratives. An immense upgrade on the first game, Death Stranding 2 is an unequivocal masterpiece. Gaming Bolt also gave it 100, saying Death Stranding 2 delivers stunning visuals, refined stealth-focused gameplay, and a richly detailed world brought to life by excellent audio and a memorable cast. It meaningfully evolves the original's mechanics, though its unique style will still divide fans. And yes, here's the thing. If you did not play Death Stranding 1, and you looked at it and said that looks boring because you're delivering packages, well, guess what you're doing in Death Stranding 2? You're still kind of delivering stuff, okay? So the core gameplay idea and loop hasn't changed, but it does seem like they have refined quite a bit when it comes to the plot, how quickly things move along, and just seeing some of the screenshots and videos that have already gone out, it looks pretty massive, and I would say captivating at times, just based on the location. So, opposite end of the spectrum here, I did want to point out, Restart Run gave it a 60, saying Death Stranding 2 is a game that pulls from the same playbook as the original, one that wants you to know it was made by the creator of Metal Gear Solid, and doesn't use its 55-hour runtime to pull on the threads that are interesting about the world. Instead, its focus on combat and retreading similar ground gets tiring fast. There are moments of something special here, but they can't shine past their own shadows. Kind of rough there on that one. And then as for the visual and graphics comparisons and breakdown, Digital Foundry, entire video on that, and the game looks incredible. Visually speaking, it might be one of the best we've seen in general, and this might be finally where the PS5 Pro really shows off what it can do. The last game that I had that in really was, I feel like, Assassin's Creed Shadows, so this would be from Kojima Productions with a game with Death Stranding 1 that already looked awesome on the PS4 Pro, now moving up to the PS5 Pro, and I think it's going to once again set that standard. I'm very excited to jump into this one. Of course, it's coming out basically the weekend of too many games, so it might be a situation of play a little before that and then really dive in next week when I get back, but I will absolutely be all over this game. Very excited to check it out. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about generative AI, which is certainly a dirty word on social media. It's doesn't go over well when it comes up in conversation, even though I do think that there are genuinely some great uses of it to help workers currently in the workspace and trying to get things done a bit faster there as more of a tool as opposed to just completely replacing people. But naturally, it's coming up in the gaming space with development taking longer and longer. Well, there was an interview with Masahiro Sakurai and Yahoo about the idea of longer development cycles, and, well, he did bring up generative AI, but there was a translation that was put out that seemed to kind of miss, I guess, some of the intention behind what he was saying. So let's take a look. This is posted, this by Source Gaming, And they are crediting Push Dustin with the review here, or the translation, I'm sorry, and reviewing this interview a bit more deeply to at least get the context and the idea and the meaning here. But they say, this is from Yahoo Japan, game development is becoming increasingly large-scale, specialized, and segmented. At the same time, the market for indie games made by individuals or small teams is also expanding. What is your perspective on the future of the gaming market? This from Sakurai saying, to be honest, it's hard to see what the future holds. I think we've reached a point where creating large-scale games like we do now is too time-consuming and unsustainable. I feel that things can't continue this way, but the only effective solution I can think of at the moment is generative AI. I believe we are at a stage where we must change our methods, such as by using generative AI to improve work efficiency. It seems that only companies that can adapt well to these changes will survive in the coming era. Source Gaming also had an editor note here saying, we think it's important not to extrapolate any additional meaning to Sakurai's thoughts on generative AI, as he's seemingly just using it as an example. He doesn't say he uses it himself, and he doesn't give any examples on how to use it. He gives a vague improves productivity response. And I mean, that's what a lot of us, the conclusion many of us have come to, I'd say at this point is, okay, if these development cycles keep getting longer and longer and longer, eventually there is a breaking point. So how do we get them down? How do we shrink them down without necessarily pulling back expectations that have been rising and are set by gamers in general? You see one game that looks incredible, you expect a game to look even better 2 or 3 years from now, right? To set the new generation of games coming in for the new system or something. Well, that along with it brings expectations that can lengthen some of these development times. We're talking generational games as in one per generation from some of these more talented studios because, of course, they have that perfectionism to them like a Naughty Dog, just as an example. So here, using generative AI to assist the workforce makes more sense, but there is always going to be that concern of a studio being kind of replaced by generative AI because, let's face it, we all see it because we follow along with this so much. There is certainly a detachment from the executive suite with the suits and stuff at the top making decisions in the boardroom and the people at these studios who are putting these games together and actually getting them out the door. And when those don't, when there's that detachment, you probably have people in the boardroom go, how many of these people can we replace with a computer program or AI and we could save a bunch of money? That's the breaking point that a lot of us assume will eventually hit, and we'll see how generative AI can do. I'm actually shocked that a studio hasn't attempted to create an entire game with generative AI yet. Maybe it's not to that point, but eventually it will be, and I'm sure someone will take a swing at that. But that's the thing. Generative AI does have some very good uses, and I'm sure some of you may have already used it at your job to cut down on some really boring or annoying tasks that would take all day. It's like, yeah, I can use generative AI to help me out and get this work done faster. That's kind of the idea, right? A tool, not a replacement. I'm hoping we get back to the point of more nuanced discussion around generative AI, because it does feel very much like it's just like cut and dry. It's either yes or no with generative AI. I just don't think that's a great way to view it because, again, there are some legitimate use cases for it that doesn't end up with everyone just kind of losing their job. And before we go to the comment of the day, we'll take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, if you picked up a Switch 2, have you been playing it in docked or handheld mode more? 60% have been playing in docked mode, 40% in handheld mode. That's the other thing. When the screen was being discussed, I thought, wow, I've really been playing this system in docked mode a lot. I think it's been 80% docked, 20% handheld, and that's just because the games look pretty good on like the big screen right now, like the big OLED, 4K OLED. They look good. So the thing with the Switch 1, especially in its later years, became very obvious that it didn't translate over well to the big screen. So in handheld mode, it made more sense to shrink it down and use that 7-inch screen, we'll say, on the Switch OLED. Again, OLED display, it looked very nice in handheld mode versus blowing it up to a 65-inch screen and just crossing your fingers hoping it didn't look like a Vaseline-covered display. Here, though, not the case. A lot of these games look very, very good blown up there on the screen and even upscaled 4K. So I thought about that, said maybe that's one of the reasons I haven't noticed as much. I still don't really see it in Mario Kart, though. But in 2D games like Mario World, I can. So it's going to be hit and miss there. And of course, depending on how sensitive you are to it, you may just never notice it. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day as you're seeing here. This is from Ghost0055. Says, learning to disassemble, shell swap, and repair the Switch and Joy-Con from your videos was one of my inspirations to go back to college. And now I have a full-time job as a computer systems technician with benefits and a pension. Thanks, John. Oh, shout out to Gus. It's awesome. I've thought about this a bit, though, with this show, how many years it's been running now. I should have, numbered them. Sometimes people will do, I think Ryan numbers all of his Let's Talk PlayStations. Man, I should have done that with Newswave so I know which episode I'm even on anymore. But it has been running legitimately for years and years. I thought, man, I wonder one day as I'm doing this 10 years from now, somebody like, I started watching you in the middle school and now I've graduated. I have this degree and I'm in this awesome job. It's like, wow, it really has, I've run that long doing this. But hey, tell me that wouldn't be good for finals week. Get it to pass. You gotta be able to disassemble this Joy-Con, replace the stick, shell swap it, get it all back together, and then it has to sync not only to the Switch, but also work. That's something that I'm sure would cause nightmares and keep people up at night, just trying to get that done and memorized for the next day. And ladies and gentlemen, that's gonna do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. If you missed yesterday's Newswave, I'll leave it up here in a card. Or maybe we'll see more about an accessory for the Switch 2 that's been selling out like crazy, and I go over exactly why that is with a Walmart branded SD card. I'll leave that right below it. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.